China is often called the oldest living civilization on Earth. The claim is not casual. The people who say it mean something specific. They mean that while Egypt fell and became a ruin to be studied, while Rome collapsed into the countries that now stand on its bones, while Babylon and the cities of the Indus passed out of the world entirely, China kept going. The same written language in recognizable form for more than 3,000 years. The same rivers feeding the same valleys. A single thread, unbroken, running from the Bronze Age to the skyline of Shanghai. And almost none of it is true in the way you have been told. The thread was cut more than once. China has been conquered whole by armies that came from outside it. It has shattered into rival kingdoms that fought each other for centuries at a stretch. It has watched its capital burn, its dynasties end, its emperors die in exile or in chains. By any honest count, the thing we call China has collapsed completely and been built again from the ruins at least 3 times. Both of these things are true at once. It is the most continuous civilization in human history, and it is a civilization that has died and been reassembled again and again. So which is it? A culture that never broke, or one that simply refused to stay broken? The land itself gives no easy answer. China is almost the size of all of Europe. It holds the highest plateau on the planet and one of its lowest deserts. It has tropical coastline where elephants still walk, and subarctic forest where tigers hunt in the snow. Nearly 1 in every 5 people alive lives within its borders. To cross it from the deserts of the northwest to the rice terraces of the south is to pass through more worlds than most continents contain. And across all of it runs the same strange pattern. Order, then collapse. Collapse, then order rebuilt. The cycle is so old that the people living inside it gave it a name more than 2,000 years ago. They called it the mandate of heaven. The idea that the right to rule was granted from above and could be taken away. When the floods came, when the harvests failed, when the armies lost, it meant the mandate had passed. The old order was finished. Someone new would gather the pieces. This is the story of those gatherings, 3 of them in particular. 3 times the country broke so badly that it should have ended. The way Rome ended, the way Egypt ended. And 3 times it did not end. It reset. The first reset happened in the spring of 221 before the Common Era, when 7 kingdoms that had been killing each other for 2.5 centuries were forced at sword point into one. The second came more than 1,000 years later, when a people from the northern grasslands rode across the wall built to stop them, conquered everything, and then, within a single lifetime, became Chinese emperors themselves. The third is the one still settling. It began in 1911, when a 6-year-old boy gave up a throne that had existed, in some form, for longer than the distance between us and Julius Caesar. 2,000 years of emperors stopped in an afternoon, with a signature he was too young to read. To understand how a civilization survives its own death, you have to begin where China itself began. Not with an emperor, with a river. The Yellow River drops out of the Tibetan highlands and runs east for 3,000 miles before it reaches the sea. Along the way, it cuts through a vast plateau of loess, fine, yellow, wind-blown soil, soft enough to dig a house into, fertile enough to feed a nation. The river carries that soil with it, so much of it that the water runs the color of milky tea, and the riverbed itself slowly rises year after year, lifted by its own sediment until the river runs higher than the fields beside it, held in only by walls of earth. When those walls break, the water does not flood the valley, it leaves it. The Yellow River has changed its course across the map dozens of times in recorded history, swinging hundreds of miles north or south, drowning whole provinces in a season. It has killed more human beings than any other natural feature on the planet. For 4,000 years, the people who lived beside it have called it by a second name, China's sorrow. And yet they stayed, because the same soil that the river steals and scatters is the soil that grows the grain. The first Chinese states rose here, in the floodplain of a river that gave them everything and took it back without warning. From the very beginning, the civilization was built on a deal it could not refuse and could not trust. Build and be fed. Build and be drowned. Build again. By the 5th century before the Common Era, the land along the Yellow River and the Yangtze to the south had broken into rival kingdoms. Historians call this the Warring States period, and the name is honest. 7 major powers and a scatter of smaller ones fought one another for 250 years. Armies grew from thousands to hundreds of thousands. The crossbow was perfected here. So was iron weaponry, mass conscription, the siege. It was also, strangely, a golden age of thought. With no single ruler to enforce a single orthodoxy, ideas competed as fiercely as armies. The Chinese remember it as the age of the 100 schools. A teacher named Confucius, known to the West as Confucius, taught that order came from duty, from each person knowing their place and honoring it. Others taught that order came from harmony with nature, from doing less rather than more. And one cold school of thought, called legalism, taught something simpler and harder, that human beings respond only to reward and punishment, and that a state strong enough to deliver both, without mercy, would outlast a state that hesitated. One kingdom believed the cold school completely. In the far west sat the state of Qin. Its neighbors thought of it as half barbarian, too close to the steppe, too rough, too willing to do what others would not. But under a ruthless minister named Shang Yang, Qin remade itself into something the world had not seen. It abolished the old aristocracy and promoted men by merit and by kills on the battlefield. It standardized its laws and applied them without exception, from peasant to prince. It turned the entire kingdom into a machine for 2 purposes only: farming and war. The machine worked. One by one, the Qin armies ground the other kingdoms down. In the year 230 before the Common Era, a young Qin king named Ying Zheng begins the final campaign. He is in his late 20s. He has survived assassins and palace plots, and he intends to finish what his ancestors started. State by state, the map goes dark. Han falls, then Zhao, then Wei and Chu and Yan. In 221, the last free kingdom, Qi, surrenders without a fight, its court paralyzed by the scale of what is coming for it. And then there is one. For the first time, the land we now call China answers to a single man. Ying Zheng decides that no existing title is large enough for what he has done. He invents a new one. He will not be a king. Kings are common. Kings are what he has just destroyed. He will be Huangdi, emperor. And because he is the first, he names himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. He rules for only 11 years. But in those 11 years, he does something no conqueror before him had managed. He does not just take the land, he fuses it. The seven kingdoms had each written with their own forms of the same characters, the way different countries today write the same numbers but speak different languages. Qin Shi Huang abolishes the variants and decrees a single script for all of them. Overnight, a merchant in the south and an official in the north can read the same order. They still cannot understand each other's speech. They often cannot to this day, but they can read each other's writing. That single decision, more than any wall or army, is what binds China together. It means that no matter how often the country shatters, anyone who can read can reach across the wreckage and touch the same words. He standardizes the rest of it too. One currency, a round bronze coin with a square hole, in use for the next 2,000 years. One width for cart axles, so that wheels cut the same ruts on every road. One set of weights and measures. One legal code. He links the defensive walls of the old kingdoms into a single barrier against the horsemen of the north, the first version of what would become the Great Wall. The cost is staggering. Hundreds of thousands of conscripts are driven onto the wall and the roads and the canals. Many die in the work and are, by some accounts, buried where they fall. Books that disagree with the state are gathered and burned. Scholars who object are, according to the histories, executed. The first emperor builds a unified country by treating the human beings inside it as material. The same legalist logic that made Qin unstoppable makes it merciless. And it makes the emperor afraid. Having conquered everything, Qin Shi Huang becomes obsessed with the one thing he cannot defeat. He sends expeditions to find islands where immortals are said to live. He swallows elixirs prepared by his alchemists, tonics that, by the cruelest irony, may have been laced with mercury. In 210, on a journey through his empire, he dies. He is 49. What he leaves behind, we did not find until 1974, when farmers digging a well outside the city of Xi'an struck a head made of clay. Beneath the fields lay an army, more than 8,000 soldiers of terracotta, life-sized, arranged in battle formation. Infantry, archers, cavalry, chariots. Every face is different. Officers stand taller than the ranks. The hands were modeled to hold real bronze weapons. They face east, toward the lands the first emperor conquered, set there to guard him in death, as living soldiers had guarded him in life. And they guard the entrance to a tomb that, according to the histories, no one has yet dared to open. A buried palace said to contain rivers of mercury flowing beneath a ceiling of jeweled stars. He wanted to live forever. In a way no alchemist could have promised, he did. His dynasty did not. The Qin survived its founder by only 4 years. The cruelty that built the empire could not hold it once the iron will at the center was gone. Rebellions swept the country, and the Qin fell as fast as it had risen. But here is the thing that matters. The next dynasty, the Han, tore down the Qin's cruelty and kept everything else. The unified script, the roads, the bureaucracy, the idea that China should be one thing, ruled from one center. The Qin lasted 15 years. The shape it forced onto the country lasted 2,000. China had been reset once. From now on, it would always remember that it was supposed to be whole. How does a civilization remember something for 2,000 years? Part of the answer is a single man writing in disgrace. His name was Sima Qian. He lived under the Han, about a century after the first emperor, and he served as the court's grand historian, the keeper of records. He had inherited the work from his father, along with a charge to write the complete history of the Chinese world, from its legendary beginnings to his own time. Then, he made a mistake. He defended a general who had surrendered to the enemy, and the emperor took it as an insult. Sima Qian was given a choice: execution or castration, a punishment considered so shameful that most men chose death. He chose to live. He chose it for one reason: he had not finished the book. He wrote that he endured the shame because to die with the work undone would be to vanish, as he put it, like a single hair from an ox. So he stayed alive, dishonored, and he finished it. 130 chapters, 500,000 characters, the lives of emperors and rebels and assassins and merchants. He invented the form that Chinese history would take for the next 2,000 years. Every dynasty after him appointed its own historians to write the record of the dynasty before. The chain never broke. This is the quiet machinery beneath the resets. A country can lose its capital, its ruler, its army. But as long as someone is still writing it all down in the same script, the memory survives the collapse. China rebuilt itself so many times in part because it never lost the instructions. The past was always there, written down, waiting to be picked up again. The mountains where that past was preserved are the same mountains that preserve some of the rarest life on Earth. Running east to west, across the country's center, is a range called the Qinling, a name that shares its first sound with the Qin themselves. The Qinling is the dividing line between northern and southern China, the wall of stone that separates the wheat from the rice, the dry from the wet. And on its forested slopes lives an animal that has made its own kind of reset. The giant panda is a bear that gave up being a predator. Its ancestors ate meat. Somewhere in the deep past, it turned away from the hunt and toward the one food that almost nothing else in the forest wanted: bamboo. It was a strange bargain. Bamboo is so poor in nutrition that a panda must eat for up to 14 hours a day and pass through dozens of pounds of it just to stay alive. It kept the digestive system of a carnivore and pointed it at a plant. To help, it grew a sixth false thumb from a wrist bone, the better to strip the stalks. It worked for 2 million years. By choosing the food no one would fight it for, the panda found a kind of peace, slow, solitary, almost monastic, drifting through the mist of the Qinling, eating the one thing that surrounds it. There were perhaps only 1,000 left in the wild by the 1980s, hemmed in by logging and roads. Today, there are closer to 2,000, and the species has been pulled back from the edge of extinction. It survived the way China survives, not by overpowering its circumstances, by adapting so completely to them that it became impossible to remove. Holding a country this size together has always required moving things across it: grain, soldiers, silk, salt. The rivers run east to west toward the sea, but the power and the hunger ran north to south. So the Chinese did something no other ancient civilization attempted at this scale. They dug a river of their own. The The Grand Canal stretches more than 1,000 miles, linking the Yellow River in the north to the Yangtze and beyond in the south. Begun in fragments, joined into one waterway by the 7th century, it is the longest artificial river ever built. A hand-dug seam stitching the wet, rice-rich south to the dry, governing north. Barges of southern grain floated north to feed the capital and the armies. When the canal flowed, the empire held together. When it silted up or broke, the empire began to come apart. It is still in use today, in stretches 14 centuries after it was joined. The infrastructure of unity outlived nearly everyone who ruled over it. The river the canal reached for in the south is the third longest on Earth. The Yangtze rises in the glaciers of the Tibetan Plateau and runs nearly 4,000 miles to the sea at Shanghai, draining a basin that holds a third of all the people in China. For most of its course, it is broad and slow, but where it cuts through the mountains of the center, it narrows into the three gorges, sheer cliffs rising hundreds of feet, the water funneled into a fraction of its width, fast and dark and dangerous. For thousands of years, boats going upriver could not fight that current alone. So men did. Trackers, sometimes hundreds of them, walked the cliff paths with ropes over their shoulders, hauling the boats against the river by muscle, their bodies bent nearly to the ground, singing in rhythm to keep the pull together. The grooves their ropes wore into the rock are still there. And then, at the end of the 20th century, China reached for the Yangtze the way the first emperor reached for the warring states. It built the largest dam on Earth across the three gorges. The reservoir that rose behind it drowned 13 cities, hundreds of towns, thousands of villages. More than 1 million people were moved from homes their families had held for centuries. Ancient sites vanished under the water. The dam generates a staggering amount of power, and it tames a river that drowned hundreds of thousands within living memory. It is, depending on where you stand, the country's most extraordinary act of engineering or its most painful, and it is both at the same time. The same old bargain the Yellow River first offered: build and be fed. Build and lose something you cannot get back. The river kept one secret it did not give back. For 20 million years, the Yangtze was home to a pale, nearly blind freshwater dolphin called the baiji. It navigated the muddy water by sound, the way the river people navigated by memory. By the start of this century, the noise of shipping, the fishing, the dams, and the poison had reduced it to almost nothing. In 2006, a survey searched the entire river for 6 weeks and could not find a single one. The baiji was declared functionally extinct, the first large animal driven out of existence by human beings in half a century. It survived 20 million years of the river's floods and droughts. It did not survive the most recent reset. The west of the country was always the door through which the wider world came in, and through which China's most famous export went out. The Silk Road did not begin as a road. It began as a thirst. 2,000 years ago, the Han court sent an envoy west and learned of horses, far stronger than China's own, bred in the valleys of Central Asia. To get them, China had something the world wanted: a shimmering thread, light as air and strong as wire, whose making it had kept secret for centuries. That secret was an insect. The silkworm is not a worm at all, but the caterpillar of a moth, and it has been bred by human hands in China for perhaps 5,000 years. Over those millennia, it changed under domestication until it became something that exists nowhere in the wild. The adult moth cannot fly. It cannot eat. It has no working defense against any predator. It lives only to mate and lay eggs, and then it dies. The caterpillar will eat only the leaves of the mulberry tree, and only when humans bring them. It spins its cocoon from a single, unbroken filament of silk that can run nearly a mile in length. And that filament, unwound, is the thread that built the Silk Road. The silkworm is the perfect emblem of this civilization's strange genius and its strange dependence, bound so tightly to the people who raised it that it can no longer survive without them. It cannot exist outside the relationship. Neither, in a way, could the road it created, a corridor of caravans and oasis cities running thousands of miles into the deserts of the West. At the western edge of that road, where the green of China gives way to the sand of the Gobi, sits a cliff face honeycombed with caves. Dunhuang. For 1,000 years, travelers paused here at the threshold between the known world and the unknown, and they prayed. They carved hundreds of grottos into the rock and filled them with painted Buddhas and dancing celestial figures, layer upon layer, century after century. The faith they painted there did not come from China. Buddhism arrived along this very road, carried west to east by monks and merchants, until a religion born in India became one of the great spiritual traditions of the Chinese world. This is the part the story of the unbroken thread leaves out. The civilization that is praised for its purity and its continuity was all along absorbing. Foreign horses, foreign gods, foreign peoples, foreign ideas, taken in, made Chinese, and woven so completely into the whole that later generations forgot they were ever foreign at all. The thread was never pure. It was a rope, twisted from 100 fibers, and that is exactly why it never snapped. Past the deserts and back toward the heart of the country lies the great basin of Sichuan, a bowl of fertile land ringed by mountains, so well watered and so productive that it has fed armies and emperors for 2,000 years. Its capital, Chengdu, has been a city since before the first emperor, and it carries a reputation for slowness in the best sense. People here sit in tea houses for entire afternoons, playing cards, having their ears cleaned by men with long, thin tools, letting time pool around them. It is a place that has watched dynasties come and go and decided that the tea matters more. Higher still, beyond the tree line, the land rises into the Tibetan Plateau, the roof of the world, an expanse the size of Western Europe sitting nearly 3 miles above the sea. The air here holds barely half the oxygen of the lowlands. The rivers that feed half of Asia are born here, in the glaciers and the high, cold lakes. For the people who have lived here for thousands of years, the plateau is sacred ground, its peaks the homes of gods, its monasteries clinging to slopes where the sky comes close enough to touch. And across that thin-aired emptiness moves a ghost. The snow leopard hunts the high ridges, so rarely seen that herders who live their whole lives in its territory may glimpse it only a handful of times. Its fur is the grey and white of stone and snow. Its tail is nearly as long as its body, wrapped around itself for warmth in the killing cold. It can take down prey 3 times its weight and leap the width of a mountain stream. It survives where almost nothing survives, by being almost no one at all, a smudge of grey that the mountain seems to absorb the moment you look away. Far to the south, the country softens into something out of a painting, and in truth, it is the painting. Around the town of Guilin, the Li River winds between thousands of limestone hills, cast towers that rise straight out of the rice paddies like the backs of some sleeping herd, their summits lost in mist. Chinese painters have rendered this landscape for over 1,000 years, and the image is so woven into the culture that it is printed on the back of the country's 20-yuan note. Fishermen here once worked the river with trained cormorants, sending the birds underwater to catch fish and bring them back. A partnership between human and animal that is centuries old, and now nearly gone, kept alive mostly for the cameras. Further south and west, the land turns tropical. In the rainforests of Yunnan and on the island of Hainan, wild Asian elephants still walk, the last in China, a few hundred of them, ranging through forest at the country's warm edge. It is a measure of the sheer span of the place. The same nation that hides snow leopards on a frozen plateau hides elephants in a jungle inside a single set of borders. And scattered across the country stand the mountains the Chinese have held sacred for as long as there has been a China. Chief among them is Mount Tai in the east. For more than 2,000 years, emperors climbed its stone stairs to perform a rare and solemn rite, to announce to heaven that their rule was just and to receive, in return, the confirmation of the mandate. Only a handful of rulers across all of history were judged worthy to make the climb. The same mountain, the same steps, the same idea that the right to rule is granted from above and can be withdrawn. The belief that explained every reset written into the stone of a single hill. Not far away lie the gardens of Suzhou and the lake at Hangzhou, where the refinement of the south reached its height. Places built not to defend or to govern, but simply to be beautiful, as if a civilization that knew it would one day fall had decided that grace was worth the trouble anyway. All of this, the rivers, the canal, the script, the road, the basin, the plateau, the sacred peaks, held together again and again under the rule of emperors at the center. But the center had an enemy it could never finally beat. It did not come from inside China. It came from the grasslands to the north. Beyond the farmland, beyond the last fields, the land turns to steppe, vast open grass where crops will not grow and only herds can live. The people of the steppe were horsemen, raised in the saddle, able to ride and shoot and vanish across distances no infantry could follow. For 2,000 years, they were the great fear of the Chinese world. The walls were built against them. Every version of the Great Wall, and there were many, rebuilt and extended across the centuries until the stone and brick we know today, snaked for thousands of miles across the northern mountains, was built for one purpose: to keep the horsemen out. The wall is the longest structure human beings have ever made. It runs over mountains, through deserts, along ridgelines, for a distance that, end to end with all its branches, exceeds 13,000 miles. Generations of laborers died building it, and they are part of why the country remembers it with such complicated feeling, a monument to security and to suffering at once. Standing on it today, watching it ride the spine of the mountains until it disappears into haze, it looks unconquerable. It was not. In the early 13th century, the tribes of the steppe were united by a single man, Genghis Khan, into the most formidable cavalry army the world had ever seen. The Mongols did not fear the wall. They went around it, through it, over it. They broke into northern China and took it. And a generation later, Genghis's grandson set out to finish the job. His name was Kublai Khan. He turned south against the last holdout, the Song dynasty, which had retreated to the rich, water-laced lands below the Yangtze and held out for decades. The Song were not weak. They were the most advanced society on Earth at the time. They had paper money, printing, gunpowder, cities of more than 1 million people, a navy. But the Mongols learned. They learned to fight on rivers. They learned to take walled cities. They turned China's own technology against it. In 1279, the last Song loyalists make their final stand at sea, off the southern coast, in a desperate battle of ships lashed together. They lose. According to the histories, a court official takes the last child emperor of the Song into his arms and leaps from the deck into the water, drowning them both rather than let the boy be captured. With them sinks the dynasty. For the first time in its history, all of China, north and south, every river and every wall, is ruled by a foreign conqueror. This is the moment the story of unbroken continuity should end. A nomadic people from outside the civilization had erased the most sophisticated state on Earth and seized everything. By the logic of every other ancient civilization, this is how it ends. Conquest, and then absorption into someone else's empire, and then the slow forgetting. Instead, the strangest thing happened. The conqueror became the conquered. Kublai Khan did not rule China as a Mongol overlord sitting on top of a foreign land. He moved his capital into China, to a city he built up in the north, Khanbalik, the city we now call Beijing. He took a Chinese dynastic name, the Yuan, as if he was simply the next in the long line of emperors. He governed through the Chinese bureaucracy, kept the records in the Chinese way, performed the Chinese rituals of rule. His successors slid further in. Within a few generations, the descendants of the horsemen who had conquered everything were, for all practical purposes, Chinese emperors, speaking the court's language, ruling by its logic, swallowed by the very thing they had defeated. This is the second reset, and it is the most revealing of the three. China did not survive the Mongols by defeating them. It survived them by digesting them. The civilization had become so large, so deep, so self-documenting that conquering it was like swallowing the sea. Whatever came in was simply absorbed into the whole. The Yuan dynasty fell within a century, replaced by a native Chinese dynasty, the Ming, that threw the Mongols back to the steppe and rebuilt the wall higher than ever. But the lesson held. China had been conquered completely and had still somehow remained China. It had reset around its invaders and come out the other side. The Ming built the heart of the capital that still stands at the center of Beijing, the Forbidden City, a walled palace of nearly 1,000 buildings, the largest such complex on Earth, where for 5 centuries no commoner could enter and no emperor needed to leave. Then the Ming too weakened and fell. And in 1644, another people from the north, the Manchus, from the forests beyond the steppe, came through the wall and took the throne. They were the second foreign people to conquer all of China, and they followed the same path the Mongols had. The Manchus founded the Qing dynasty, moved into the Forbidden City, kept the bureaucracy and the examinations and the rituals, and ruled as Chinese emperors. They expanded the empire to its greatest size. They forced Chinese men to wear their hair in the Manchu queue, the long braid, as a sign of submission. And that braid became, within a few generations, simply what a Chinese man's hair looked like. Once again, the conqueror's mark had been absorbed until no one remembered it was a conqueror's mark at all. The far northeast they came from is a different China altogether, the forests of Manchuria, around the city of Harbin, where winters are so cold the city holds festivals of buildings carved entirely from ice. In those forests prowls the largest cat on the planet. The Amur tiger, the Siberian tiger, can weigh more than 600 pounds and walk through snow that would stop almost anything else. It was hunted to the edge of vanishing, down to a few dozen animals. Protected at last, it has crept back to several hundred. Like so much in this country, it survives in the cold margins, in the place too harsh for the crowds, holding on. The Qing rose to a height no Chinese dynasty had reached, and then, in the 19th century, it began the long decline that every dynasty before it had eventually suffered. But this time, the danger came from a direction the wall had never faced. Not the steppe, the sea. In 1839, a dispute over the opium that British merchants were selling into China, a trade that was poisoning the population and draining the country's silver, erupted into war. China lost. It had ruled itself as the center of the world for 2,000 years, and it discovered, suddenly and brutally, that the world had moved on without it. European gunboats it could not match forced open its ports, took its territory, imposed treaties on terms China could not refuse. Hong Kong was taken by Britain. Other powers carved out their own concessions in the coastal cities. The Middle Kingdom, which had absorbed every conqueror who ever rode against it, could not absorb this one. The foreigners did not want to become Chinese. They wanted to trade and to rule the trade. And as the dynasty buckled from outside, it tore from within. In the middle of the century, a failed scholar who believed he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ raised a rebellion across southern China. The Taiping Rebellion lasted 14 years and consumed the most populous provinces in the country. By the time it was crushed, the dead numbered in the tens of millions. By some estimates, 20 to 30 million people. It is among the deadliest conflicts in all of human history, and outside China, almost no one in the West has heard its name. The Yellow River flooded again in these years. Famine came. The mandate, the old logic would have said, was passing. It was. But what came next was not another dynasty. For the first time in 2,000 years, when the order at the center failed, no one rebuilt it in the same shape. The thing that broke this time was the idea of empire itself. On a throne inside the Forbidden City sat a child. His name was Puyi. He had been made emperor in 1908 at the age of 2, carried screaming to a coronation he could not understand, lifted onto a seat his family had held for nearly 3 centuries, and that emperors of one line or another had held for over 2,000 years. He was the lord of 10,000 years. He was 3 years old. In October of 1911, a revolution breaks out. It spreads faster than anyone can contain it. The provinces declare independence from the throne, one after another. The army cannot be relied on. The court has no answer. And in February of 1912, the boy emperor's regents sign a document of abdication on his behalf. Puyi is 6 years old. He does not understand what is being given away. With his name on that page, the Qing dynasty ends, and with it, the entire imperial system that the first emperor had founded in 221 before the Common Era. 2,133 years of emperors, ended by the signature of a child who would spend the rest of his life as a kind of ghost, kept for years inside the Forbidden City as a sovereign of nothing, later installed by the Japanese as a puppet ruler over occupied Manchuria, later imprisoned, later released, and finally at the end, working as a gardener in Beijing, an ordinary citizen tending plants a short walk from the throne room where he had once been worshipped as the Son of Heaven. The last emperor of China died in 1967 with no title at all. But the abdication did not bring peace. It brought the longest and most violent part of the reset. The empire was gone, and nothing strong enough had replaced it. The country fragmented into territories ruled by warlords. A republic was declared and could not hold. Then came invasion, the Japanese occupation beginning in earnest in the 1930s, which killed many millions and burned across the country for years. And running through all of it, a civil war between rival visions of what the new China should be. A war that paused only to fight the invader and then resumed once he was gone. For the better part of 40 years, from the boy emperor's signature to the middle of the 20th century, China was, by any measure, a broken country. Fragmented, invaded, starving in places, fighting itself. This was the deepest collapse of the three, because it was not just a change of rulers, it was the end of a system that had defined the civilization for 2 millennia, and the agonizing, bloody search for whatever would come after it. What came after was built at a cost the country is still reckoning with. The decades that followed the founding of the new state in 1949 brought reunification and an end to the warlords and the foreign concessions, but also famine on a catastrophic scale and years of political convulsion that turned the society against itself and destroyed an incalculable amount of the old culture, the temples, the texts, the memory that men like Sima Qian had spent 2,000 years preserving. The third reset, like the first under the Qin, was paid for in human lives at a scale that is difficult to hold in the mind. And then, as it had done after every collapse, the country gathered itself and began, again, to build. If you want to see the speed of that rebuilding, look at a single city. In 1980, Shenzhen, across the border from Hong Kong, was a fishing town of a few tens of thousands of people. It was chosen as a place to experiment with markets and foreign trade. Within 40 years, it became a metropolis of more than 17 million, a center of global technology, a forest of towers grown from rice paddies in a single human lifetime. Nothing in the history of cities has ever grown that fast. It is the third reset made visible, a country that, having torn itself down to the foundations, rebuilt at a velocity the world had never witnessed. And at the center of it all, the old capital still holds the seam where the resets meet. Beijing was the Mongols' Khan Balik, the Ming and the Qing's imperial seat, the stage of the abdication, and the heart of the state that rose from the ruins. The Forbidden City still stands at its core, its golden roofs facing south as they have for 600 years. The throne room empty now, walked through by millions of visitors a year. And just outside its southern gate lies the vast open expanse of Tiananmen Square, the place where, across the 20th century, the new China was declared, mourned, celebrated, and contested. The throne room of the empire and the public square of the republic, separated by a single wall and 500 years. Stand in that spot, and you are standing on all three resets at once. Beneath your feet, the layers. The unified empire, the first emperor forged in blood and standardized script. The foreign conquerors who came to destroy China and were instead remade by it. And the modern state, built on the wreckage of the oldest continuous monarchy on Earth, still close enough to that wreckage that the last emperor was tending a garden nearby, within living memory. So we come back to the question we began with. Is China the civilization that never broke, or the one that refused to stay broken? The honest answer is that the question contains a false choice. China's famous continuity is not the absence of collapse. It is the presence of reassembly. The thread did snap, 3 great times and many smaller ones. What makes China extraordinary is not that the breaks never happened. It is that something always remained intact through the break. The script, the records, the idea of a center, the memory of having been whole. And around that surviving core, the country rebuilt itself every single time. Continuity here is not a state of being. It is an act, repeated at terrible cost across more than 2,000 years. The 5,000 years of unbroken civilization is, in part, a story China tells itself, a thread drawn deliberately through the breaks to bind them into one. But it is not a lie. The thread is real, precisely because each generation chose to pick it up again from the rubble and tie it to what came before. A civilization is not a thing that survives. It is a thing that is carried, handed forward, dropped, picked up, handed forward again. Which leaves the one question this story cannot answer. The cycle has turned 3 times within our knowledge, and many more times before that. Order, then collapse, then order rebuilt. The dam on the Yangtze, the towers of Shenzhen, the empty throne in Beijing. They all sit somewhere on that wheel. And no one who has ever lived inside the pattern has been able to see where on the wheel they stood. We can say with certainty that China has been reset 3 times. We cannot say whether we are watching the long, stable middle of the 4th rebuilding, or standing, without knowing it, somewhere closer to the edge. No one inside the cycle has ever known. The river that gave everything and took it back without warning is still running, still the color of milky tea, still carrying the soil of the highlands toward the sea. It does not announce when the walls will break. It never has. Thank you for traveling with us across the country that has died and been reborn more times than almost any other on Earth. Until the next journey, take a breath and stay a while.